Today I am going to talk about the Neolithic cultures in the Indian subcontinent. Now, the beginning of food production with which the Neolithic culture is associated is principally connected with two things: the domestication of plants and animals and the beginnings of agriculture. Now, about the term Neolithic Revolution. This term was coined by Gordon Childe, and certain salient features are associated with this revolution, with the Neolithic Revolution. A change in technology, ground and polished stones, which led to easier cultivation of soil and definitely agriculture. What Childe has shown in terms of the three different civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia and Indus, that gradually there was a growth of social surplus resulting from the storage of grain and cereals. Now, this was getting concentrated in the hands of a few or one person who was emerging as the leader of the community. And with this developed a social hierarchy. Now, this is what was termed as a revolution by Childe. The recent research has shown that we cannot really talk of a revolution. There were changes which happened gradually, and it was far more complex than Childe, who was actually a pioneer in archaeology, in archaeological thought, than what Childe had envisioned. In the Indian subcontinent, we have varied patterns of the beginnings of food production. Firstly, we will concentrate on a site which actually does not fall in India. It falls in Bolan Valley, in fact, part of the northwestern section of the Kachi-Bolan plain in Balochistan. This is the site of Mehergarh. This Kachi-Bolan plain merges with the Indus Valley. And we will see that there is a continuity or certain traces that we are finding in the civilization, in the culture in Mehergarh, which can be tracked down to Indus Valley later in the Harappan civilization. The excavations happened firstly during the period 1974 to 1985, and it started again from 97. We see Mehergarh spreads over 300 hectares. In the Neolithic, it is divided into two periods, the Aceramic Neolithic and the Ceramic Neolithic. The Aceramic Neolithic is basically Neolithic without pottery, and the Ceramic Neolithic is Neolithic with pottery. With the later phase of excavations, that is 97 to 2000, we see that the internal stratigraphy of the Aceramic Neolithic was redefined. The Bolan Valley is situated in the southeastern limit of the distribution area of the wild ancestors of the species, of the domesticated species like cattle, sheep, goat, wheat and barley. We will see that their subsistence of the people revolved around these animal and plant species. And we see that these raw materials, these species of plants and animals were within very easy mobility of the past populations of Mehergarh. Besides, we also find easy availability of resources of flint, which is used for making tools, and bitumen. There are springs of bitumen deposits. Now, recent studies, paleobotanical studies, have revealed that the environment of the Aceramic Neolithic, which goes back to around 7000 BC or slightly before 7000 BC, that was a semi-lacustrine, humid environment. The Aceramic Neolithic period, we see that it is about 7 meter thick, the occupation deposit. And this 7 meter thick occupation deposit is divided into about 9 levels or layers. We find that there was a construction of houses whose walls were made of 2 centimeter thick clay mortar, and they were very, very solid constructions. And the houses were generally made of 2 rows of hand molded bricks. They were two-roomed, six-roomed, and multiple-room structures. Storage facilities were seen in multiple-roomed structures which had 6 rooms. And we find from the archaeological deposits remains of cereal. So possibly this was an area, or certain structures like this were used for storage purposes. There is no sign of fireplace in these kind of storage facilities, whereas we do find fireplace basically in the houses with other rooms. Now, apart from the houses, we are also finding some 318 graves which are alternating with the house construction. And from the graves, from the kind of deposits of grave offerings, we also get an idea of the kind of craft specialization in which these people specialized in. For example, there are a huge amount of beads which have been found, beads of calcite, steatite, and things like that. Remains of wild animal species which were hunted, like wild sheep, goat, then asses, nilgai, deer have also been found. We are also getting the earliest traces of domesticated species, so the beginnings of pastoralism in the domestication of sheep, goat, and later we see that cattle is also becoming important. After the Aceramic Neolithic, we come to the Ceramic Neolithic, placed around 5800 BC or so. And the structures that we are finding in the Ceramic Neolithic now, they were superimposed on these ruins and on the alluvial terrace formation at the edge of the lower mound. From Bolan Valley, now we travel to north and northwestern India. I would first like to concentrate on Kashmir. Here, basically, we are finding 3 sites which were excavated. First, I would like to concentrate on Kanishkapur, which is the latest excavation of a Neolithic site. Now, here we find again both the ceramic and the Aceramic periods, but the Aceramic occupation deposit is very, very thin. The ceramic Neolithic deposit is about 1.6 to 2 meter. 4 floor levels have been found from the ceramic Neolithic period, and from which we can make out that there were houses of mud brick which had existed, and these mud brick houses also had a lot of the material culture deposits. Now, the pottery is basically that typical of the early Neolithic pottery, dull red and grey ware. And apart from these, we are finding some food processing implements as well. So, we do find some pounders, some stone polishers, then we do find some microliths and bone points. Interestingly, a lot of work has been just one season of excavation, but a lot of work has been done on the paleobotany. In fact, Mani is recording that there were 13 species of fruit, seeds and plants which were found from these region. Now, what were the crops which were cultivated? Of course, we are not finding rice, but bread wheat, emmer wheat, barley are the main types which have been found. And then we are finding evidence of hunting animals, some domestication of sheep and goat. And so we are getting a very interesting picture of a Neolithic life, which again was quite different from what we are finding in Mehergarh. Besides Kanishkapur, the 2 other sites are Burzahum and Gufkral. Burzahum, the dates that we have, calibrated dates, 2783 to 1689 BC. Burzahum is famous for its pit dwellings. Maybe because of extreme cold, these people lived in the subterranean level. In Gufkral as well as Burzahum, we are finding 2 levels of Neolithic development. And another interesting thing about Burzahum is the burials. In fact, we are finding animal burials as well with human burials. Now, the north central India is comprising the districts, where these sites have been found, is comprising the districts of Rewa, Satna, Sydney in Madhya Pradesh, and Banda, Chitrakoot, Allahabad, Mirzapur, Sonbhadra, Chandauli districts of Uttar Pradesh. Now, what are the different types of wares that we are finding in these sites? We are finding handmade pottery and also some wheel-made types, rusticated ware, burnished redware, greyware. Then we are finding a lot of these food processing implements like querns, mullers, hammerstones, then pounders, microliths, and definitely remains of domesticated plants and animals, which are coming out from archaeozoological and paleobotanical studies. Apart from these, some interesting artifacts which have come from the sites are these tanged bone arrowheads, then shell pendants, earthen discs with central perforations, and a few crops which have been cultivated in these areas are rice and wheat, barley, millets, sesame. When we look at the dates, we have some very, very early dates. Firstly, we got these dates, series of dates from Koldihawa and Tokwa. Early dates of rice from this area, which pushed back the antiquity of food production to about 7th millennium BP. And recent dates from many of the mid-Ganga Valley sites, particularly Lahura Deva, have pushed back the antiquity even further. We are finding, as I said before, the transition from the earlier Mesolithic context. We see that there is an overlapping of traditions in technology. And this was first seen, the archaeological evidence was first found in this site called Chopanimando, where we see this transition from the Mesolithic to the beginnings of food production. With this, now we turn to the neighboring region of Mid-Ganga Valley, where a huge amount of work has been done. Now here, which are the most important sites? Again, there are hundreds of sites. A few have been taken up or were taken up for excavation. Among these, I would like to mention Jhunsi and Hetapatti in the Allahabad district. Then Lahura Deva, very, very important site in Sant Kabir Nagar district. Then Imildi Kurd and Sohgaura in Gorakhpur district. All of these are falling in Uttar Pradesh. And in Bihar, we are finding a lot of these sites. We have Chirand, Senuvar, Taradi and Chechar. In the near vicinity, remains of micro charcoal have been found, from which one can talk of human activities in this area going back to 10,000 years before present. At the site itself, carbonized rice grains have been found, from which we can definitely say that this goes back to 9th millennium BP. In combining all the dates from other sites also like Jhusi, etc., one can definitely say that in Mid-Ganga Valley, the beginnings of agriculture is going back to 8th millennium BC. And again, we are finding a type of food production which is now getting concentrated on some of these main varieties. Rice, millets. Interestingly, we are finding wheat and barley, but again, we do not know, the implications are we do not know where the wild varieties of these crops are. And we are finding a double cropping system in Mid-Ganga Valley. So you have a winter cropping system as well as a summer cropping system. Very interesting structures of houses have been found from Jhusi and Hetapatti. And we see these oval or circular house plans from the sites. These were basically wattle and daub structures, and that can be made out from these burnt clay lumps which have been found in the site, which are bearing these reed impressions. In Chirand, some pit dwellings, evidence of some pit dwellings have been found. Now, what about the material culture? Material culture, again, we are finding handmade pottery as well as both slow and fast wheel pottery. So, you're having fine redware, ordinary redware, lustrous redware, burnished ware, rusticated ware, and various other types, as well as microliths, as well as food processing implements like quern, muller, and of course pounders, etc. About the domestication of animals, we do find evidence of cattle, sheep, goat, and of course hunting was an activity which was still carried out. Apart from these, we are finding some artifacts like terracotta objects as well as a lot of beads. A lot of beads have come from sites of Jhusi, Hetapatti and Lahura Deva. Beads made of steatite, faience, then chalcedony, agate, etc. Mid-Ganga Valley is closely related to the Neolithic cultures that I just mentioned before in the Vindhyan region. There were close connections. And here, interestingly, in the Ganga Valley, we have also found, in the western part, we have also found a lot of Mesolithic sites. And in the Mesolithic sites, very interestingly, we can see some traces of transition. So, this overlapping of tradition between two cultures, that is quite dominant, quite predominant and significant in these two regions. When we look at the western upland of West Bengal, which is forming the southeastern fringe of Chotanagpur Plateau, mainly in Midnapur, Purulia, Bankura, Bardhaman, and many of the northeastern states, we see that these Neolithic artifacts like celts, ground stone axes, and when I am mentioning West Bengal, I should also mention North Bengal, Kalimpong and Darjeeling districts. From these places, these Neolithic artifacts are seen in isolated occurrences. No definite context, no definite stratigraphy, and they are often found with microlithic tools in regions like Purulia and Midnapur, northwestern Midnapur. At the site called Tamluk, which is a coastal site, from the lowest level, which was called a Neolithic level by excavators, but we do not have substantial evidence, Neolithic cells with handmade pottery were recorded. But this is something something which needs to be worked upon, something which is still we are not very clear about. In the northeast, very interestingly, many of these Neolithic cells, we do not know what their antiquity is, but they are worshipped as ritual objects by many of the ethnic communities. Eastern India, again, we take up one of the coastal sites in Orissa, a very famous site called Golbai Shashon. Golbai Shashon has a deposit of about 7 to 8 meters. This is it is in the laterite regions and on the banks of Mahanadi. Now, again, this is a multicultural site, and the Neolithic is dated to about 2300 to 2000 BC. Interestingly, no stone tools have been found here. You found pottery, mostly handmade, as well as wheel-made pottery, probably slow wheel, and bone points have been found. Piercers made of bones have been found. And the raw material used for these bone implements were possibly some of the semi-mineralized bones which were found at the site, and some antler remains have been found, probably belong to some of these antelope species. Now, what about the decorations that we are seeing in the pottery? In the handmade pottery, we are seeing that there are decorations of reed impressions on the pottery. And where it comes to the wheel-made pottery, we are seeing that there is some red ochre painting. And we are getting some floor levels from which we can talk about, again, mud brick houses. But Golbai Shashon is probably one of the only sites in coastal Orissa which has been well worked upon. So these areas need to be investigated more. Now, the southern Neolithic is very broadly, it can be divided into two types of sites: sites with ash mound and sites without ash mound. The core region of the southern Neolithic culture is basically Shorapur Dwap, Raichur, and some of these main regions. Now, Bridget Olchin and F.R. Olchin, who have worked substantially on the southern Neolithic, classifies the Neolithic, the southern Neolithic, according to changes in technology, particularly pottery production, and also according to the importance of trade imports in a Neolithic culture. Stone tools have been found from various sites. Chert blades have been found, pounders have been found, these polished stone tools have been found. What about the raw material? They're not always available in the vicinity. Like Professor K. Padaya tried to address this problem when he took up the excavation of the ash mound site of Budihal in the Shorapur Dwap. And he documented this very interesting workshop site, which is adjacent to the main Neolithic site, from where he found a lot of these chert blades which are larger than the microlithic ones. And he surmised that the chert sources were in some of the neighboring chert veins found in the limestone rocks, probably not on the site, but a little distance away. Now, such studies are required much more if we want to say much more about, if we want to know more about the southern Neolithic culture. Next, if we think of pottery, what kind of work has been done so far? Pottery, we see that again, Neolithic, southern Neolithic, basically two main types are categorized, like the red ware and the grey ware. But there are variations of this, and in the excavation at Wadkal in Raichur Dwap, these variations are coming up. More interesting work can happen if we look at if we compare the different kinds of pottery, their variations, and if we try to understand the clay sources from which these different wares were made. From there, one can make out if there was a communication between these different localities, what was the nature of communication, for which the archaeological representation is in pottery throughout the southern Neolithic, as well as the relationship between northern sites in the northern Neolithic, north of the Vindhyas, and the southern Neolithic cultures. Because sometimes what archaeologists do, when they see similar wares, similar forms, in two distant places, two distant sites, they draw a conclusion, they draw some kind of connection. To draw upon these connections, to build upon these connections, to see whether there was widespread interaction between these different communities, one needs to do more scientific work with samples of pottery as well as clay sources, etc. Now, a lot of beads have also been found. Metal, surprisingly, has not been found so much in the southern Neolithic cultures. In the northern Neolithic cultures, in some places, copper has been found. Very, very raw variety of copper, not the kind that you're finding in the Chalcolithic. Now, and this copper that I just mentioned has been found in Kanishkapur, a site which I talked about when I talked of northwestern Indian Neolithic. Now, southern Neolithic, absolutely no trace whatsoever. Very interesting paleopathological studies have been done on skeletal remains, trying to understand what diseases afflicted these people, and archaeozoological studies, trying to understand the beginnings of domestication. Like if the evidence so far has been chiefly of cattle pastoralism, whether there has been a bias in our study. Why just cattle? Weren't other species sort of domesticated? These are certain queries and these are certain lines of inquiry which can propel us to further investigations. So we see from this very brief review of Neolithic cultures in the Indian subcontinent that there in South Asia, why I'm saying South Asia is because I included Balochistan. We are finding varied patterns of this very, very important stage in man's life, in human civilization. Varied patterns, varied representation in the archaeological assemblage, and the diversity from which we can understand the diversity of ways of life. Still more work is required, still more regions need to be highlighted. Like I just mentioned, Eastern India, especially Bengal and parts of the Northeast, parts of Orissa. Not only that, not only are new regions, they require to come under excavations and more detailed study, but also we have to be more introspective. We have to ask more detailed questions about how basically this is the time that we are seeing a development, just the beginning of the development of a social hierarchy. So how do we relate the archaeological evidence to this? How do we relate the archaeological evidence to social organization? Because on many occasions we are finding a whole lot of archaeological evidence, very, very colorful archaeological evidence. But sometimes what is lacking in the excavation reports is a more introspective understanding of the relationship of social organization to archaeological evidence, how far archaeological evidence can throw light on this.